Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. This is precisely what is happening once again to appease racial and religious bigotry against the Crusaders and Zionists, the Christians and the Jews, but this time the stakes are much higher. Iraq, Lebanon, and the Palestinian Authority, PA, are on the brink of exploding into a Shiite Sunni Islamic revolution, a revolution that is spreading like an Ebola virus throughout the Middle East, a revolution that also has America in its crosshairs and hopes to spread to our shores. A volcano of terror is at the brink of exploding in Iraq. When it does, its destructive powers will spill over into Jordan and Israel if it is not stopped. This crisis is the greatest threat to the United States since the Civil War. On December 6, 2006, James Baker and Lee Hamilton released the Iraq Study Group report on what their bipartisan commission believes should be done in Iraq. In it, they recommended that the Golan Heights be returned to Syria, a terrorist state. Judea and Samaria be given to a terrorist-led government, the Hamas-led Palestinian Authority. Iran and Syria be invited to the negotiating table as a support group with no preconditions and with UN resolutions against those two nations forgotten. Right of return into Israel be given to Palestinians, terrorists in Lebanon. Israel be required to return to pre-1967 borders, which would mean the dividing of Jerusalem. The UN be allowed to determine the destiny of Iran's nuclear program, which would, in my opinion, guarantee Iran with the bomb in a matter of a few years. And amnesty be granted to terrorists, insurgents, who slaughtered American soldiers in Iraq. On January 10, 2007, President George W. Bush addressed the nation concerning the Iraq crisis. He stated, "We benefited from the thoughtful recommendations of the Iraq Study Group." He also said that he was immediately sending Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice to the Middle East. This call to appeasement, just like Chamberlain's in the face of Nazi aggression in 1938, couldn't be clearer. My prayer in writing this book is that we will wake up before we find a sea of glassy-eyed human corpses, suicide bombers, strapped with dynamite and roaming our streets as they have done in Israel. I fear there will be another attack on American soil before the 2008 elections. Radical Islamic terrorists only step back when they fear us. Looking back. When I sat down to write Beyond Iraq, The Next Move, it was in the midst of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, and our troops were still pushing toward Baghdad. I was deeply concerned about the outcome of the war, and I remember writing, "The war in Iraq would not begin until it had ended. The greatest threats to American troops would come after the war for Baghdad had been won. Iraq's future will be more mess than messianic. There will be an army of human corpses spread like a plague across Iraq in an attempt to weaken the resolve of the American people to win this war. Deposing Saddam Hussein would not end terrorism. Instead, Iraq would become the new ground zero. Terrorism in the Bible land would not end with the fall of Baghdad, but rise to a new level. Syria and Iran would play the diplomatic card until the heat was off, and then clandestinely go back to supporting terrorism. Every possible attempt would be made to start a civil war in Iraq. Islamic radicals would attempt to turn Iraq into another Lebanon. The war could not be partially won. The victor would be determined by who wins the last battle. We must see this war through to the end, or else the next time we have to fight terrorism, it will be much worse. Can we lose the war on terrorism? We can indeed if we lose the battle for Iraq. In October 2006, American troops in Iraq lived through their bloodiest month in over a year and a half, oddly coming right on the eve of our midterm elections, where the war was a deciding factor for many voters. Those elections saw the Democrats decisively take over the House and capture a narrow majority in the Senate. The media called the election a mandate for the United States to get its troops out of Iraq. Unfortunately, the talk was not about getting our troops out of Iraq after we have won, but about the quickest route to pulling them out without completely losing face in a kiss and run. Too many are willing to concede Iraq as another Vietnam because they can't stomach the cost of actually winning this fight. What they don't realize, however, is that if we don't win this fight now, the cost